a decision has been made to breach the door. We breached the front door, and myself and my colleague were tasked with 2 others to go and do that. Our task was to be their cover officers. So while they're doing their sort of wizardry on the door, they're focusing in on that task. He then shouts, there's movement in the window. As this movement is going on, we start challenging. And then within this split second, this window that's open, the barrel of a shotgun comes out.
All right, gang, let's talk about dry fire. Dry fire is an important part of anyone's training regimen. We recommend you pick up the Manus Firearms Training System. The Manus X is a phenomenal little tool in your toolbox. Manus has been a longtime supporter of active self-protection, and we are super grateful for their support and their product. We found it to be so valuable in our own shooting work. You're going to get immediate, measurable visual feedback. It can take so much time out of the learning curve of dry fire, and this product is worth every penny, in our opinion. What gets measured gets improved, and this helps you measure every aspect of dry and live fire. Visit them at mantis.com and let them know you heard about them on the Active Self-Protection Podcast. Alrighty, gang, welcome back to the Active Self-Protection Podcast. I am your host, Mike Williver, and I am still your favorite former Fed. With us today, a new friend of mine whose name is Dave. Dave is in the UK. That's the United Kingdom, for those who don't know. Also England, depending on who you ask. I mean, it's all very confusing to us Americans. There's like 4 countries, but they're all one country. We'll talk about that another day. Dave, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it.
No problem at all. Good to be here.
Absolutely. So Dave is married with 3 kids, which I love. I remember being about his age with 4 kids, and I remember how hard it was to carve out time. So I appreciate you making time for us. He is, I guess you would say, is it police officer? Is that the title, or is it constable, or what would you? What is your actual title?
Well, it is constable, but police officer.
All right. He works for and worked for a department in the United Kingdom, which will remain unnamed. Dave, talk to us about your growing up. So you're the first guest we've had from the UK. So talk to us about sort of the mindset in England and the United Kingdom about self-defense and firearms and all that sort of thing. It's very different from here. So just kind of give us an overview of when you grew up. What was it like, and what were your thoughts on these sorts of things?
So in the UK, it is different to the US. We're a lot more risk averse in the UK, certainly from a policing perspective. When I grew up, and I sort of had minor engagements with the police, as we all do, I'm sure, as sort of youngsters and teenagers. It's definitely changed compared to what it is now. It was a little bit more robust. And I'm 41. When I was sort of 15, 16, you did something wrong. You knew about it by the local police officer. Now we've sort of moved away from that. And unfortunately, depending on who you ask, but if you're asking me, unfortunately, we've moved away, and we're a little bit more risk averse, a bit more afraid of offending people. Mm-hmm. Sometimes that's justified, but a lot of the time, it's just the way our society is here now is a little bit, definitely more risk averse from a policing perspective.
I so many things are so different. I don't remember who said it, but someone said that we are 2 countries divided by a common language. I think that was someone's phraseology back in the day. But there's so much more difference than the accent and even just the gun laws. But for example, in the UK, people can be arrested literally for speech. If they say something that is deemed offensive to a group of people or whatever, there are actually laws on the books where people can go to jail for saying things that are found offensive. And to an American perspective, that's quite literally very foreign, because we have our First Amendment here, which guarantees freedom of speech as long as you're not threatening anyone. Basically, you can say whatever you want. I assume you are aware of such laws in the UK. What are your thoughts on that sort of thing? If, for example, if I say everyone with blonde hair should be rounded up and put in jail, or whatever, I could go to jail for that. Am I accurate in that?
To some extent, that's correct. Yeah, I mean, going to jail, not so much. But certainly, if somebody was to be offended by something you said and they reported it to the police, certainly nowadays we would be looking to investigate that and deal with that. Sometimes it's justified in the way that the laws are here. there are sort of certain things that are sort of no-go areas that you won't say in public, or you won't abuse somebody by. But it has unfortunately sort of expanded into pretty much anything. So if you deem to be offended by something, um, even if it wasn't meant in that way, if you deem that you've been offended by it, then that person that has said that could potentially have a knock on the door or a phone call from the police. I think we've gone too far, and yeah, it's not great. But that unfortunately is where we are in the UK at the moment, and a lot of the public, unfortunately, have if you speak to sort of Joe Blogs on the street here, they'll probably think that the police could be doing better things with their time. I certainly think we could be doing better things with our time and dealing with proper crime. But with social media and all this, the new sort of platforms that we've got, if you decide that you're offended by something, then it must be that you are offended, and you expect some action to be taken. And a lot of the time that's just not reasonable. But that is the UK really at the moment.
Yeah, it's I guess my problem with it in general is that it's so subjective as to what might or might not be offensive speech and where do you draw that line. But that's a whole other different conversation. So talk to us about the makeup of the average, say, medium-sized constabulary police department in the UK. We know, I think most Americans know that the average beat cop, the average cop on the street in a car or on a foot beat in England is not armed with a firearm. They have obviously tasers and pepper spray and batons, or batons, as you might say.
Yeah.
What percentage of any given police department is armed, and do they patrol? Do they sit and wait to be called by another unit, or how does that work exactly?
So I work on a firearms team, which is the armed response side of policing. You probably look across the UK. My numbers are a little bit off, but we have about, I think it's 120,000 police officers in the UK, and it will be, I believe in the force that I'm currently working in, we have probably around about 120 armed police officers. So across the UK is probably in the region of probably well less than 10% of the police will be armed in the UK.
So if you're out on a patrol day, let's say you're unarmed, or at least you're not a firearms issued officer, and what would justify, for example, an armed response for you to call for someone to call you, for example, in to deal with something? Would it have to involve necessarily a firearm or a knife, or what would justify a call out for armed police?
Definitely firearms. We have a certain criteria that has to be met for armed officers to be deployed on the streets in the UK. That criteria is quite low. So it could be somebody with a knife. It could be somebody with an axe, a machete. It could be wild animals. So if you've got a dangerous dog that's attacking somebody, then that could justify armed officers being deployed. So it is quite low, unfortunately. Fortunately, we don't have the requirement to deploy armed officers to every one of those types of jobs. If it's a gun, almost definitely we'd be going to that. But it could be that a knife job where somebody's, he's waving a knife around in the street. There's been plenty of times where that would be deemed suitable for unarmed officers to go and deal with it. Sometimes that's proportionate. Other times, unfortunately, it isn't. And for various reasons, we're not sent, and that potentially could have ramifications for those unarmed officers. So we are sent to the higher end threat jobs. But there are sort of caveats where we will go to sort of less serious incidents, but we're there as mitigation, really.
Interesting. So let me ask, now it's time for your opinion. What are your thoughts on the way it's set up? Do you feel like there should be more armed officers on the street regularly? Do you feel like it's working? Have you been in a position when you were not armed with a firearm where you really wish you had been, for example?
I think as a whole, I don't think we need, let me just correct myself. We need more armed police officers on the streets on a routine basis. But I don't think as a percentage, it needs to be a higher percentage, if that makes sense. So we're sort of short of police officers as a whole in the UK. Most forces are struggling with numbers through budget cuts and government cuts.
That's true here as well.
That'll have a direct impact on, if we've got less unarmed officers on the streets, which make up the majority of police, then we're going to have less armed officers on the streets.
Sure.
If we had more of the general sort of recruitment in policing in the UK, then as a percentage, we would default have a higher sort of presence. So I think we're struggling with armed officers on the streets, but that's more of an issue in relation to overall numbers of police as opposed to what armed officers are dealing with on a daily basis. Like I say, in the UK, we're relatively fortunate that because we have quite strict gun laws here, there are less illegal firearms out there. However, that doesn't say that there aren't times where unarmed officers are met with deadly threats, basically. I've had an incident probably 10 years ago, if I recall. I was unarmed. So in the UK at that particular time, taser was quite a new tool that we had as unarmed officers. I was on routine patrol with a new constable, so I was kind of tutoring, I suppose. Mm-hmm. He was sort of a few weeks into the job, and we were patrolling around 8. I think it was about 9 o'clock at night. Remember, the public had seen us driving down, just coincidentally down the street, and basically said, "There's an armed robbery going off in a convenience store." Mm-hmm. Pointed at it. So we basically have quite strict protocols if we're not armed. So basically, the member of the public stated that there was a group of masked men. I think it was 4, if I remember, 4 or 5. One of them had a firearm, the others had machetes, and they were holding it up. Our protocol is that we don't enter that store unless there's an immediate sort of threat to life, which we weren't aware of. So I've had to call it up, request armed officers, and keep observation. So I was categorically told I'm not to enter that store. Certainly, unless I can see, one of the staff members, being hacked at or
right.
sort of physically threatened with the firearm, which goes against your sort of your moral compass as a normal member of the public, but certainly as a police officer. And I remember I was driving the vehicle, and I remember sort of sat there thinking, I need to go in. We need to go in. Mm-hmm. I was the only one with a taser, so taking a taser to a gunfight, you want a lose-lose situation, but your brain is, I need to go in and do something. But I was told categorically, no, you're not going in, just keep obs. As it happened, they come running out, and they happen to come running towards our patrol car just instinctively as they come out of the shop and they turn left.
So you're in a marked unit, so they know exactly who you are.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And we're probably about 30 meters away. And as they come running out of the store, they've then seen me and my colleague in the police car, quite sort of deliberate, just sort of gestured to us as in, well, come on then, what are you going to do? And started sort of gesturing with what was the firearm and machete. And it was at that point that you think, well, okay, what do? Do you I'm not going to be able to taser somebody, at that distance.
Right.
Do I just drive at them and run them over? Or do I sort of let them run off and follow them? And our protocol in those circumstances, because they've left the store, and is basically let them run off and follow them, which is what I did. And armed officers came in, and then they sort of disappeared into the night, and armed officers carried on the search. And I believe that at least 2 of them, were arrested, but I know not all of them were. Mm-hmm. But it's one of those sort of jobs where as a cop, you want to go in there. Your job is to go in there and protect those people. But we don't have, or routinely have, the equipment. Now, had I been armed, and my colleague been armed and been trained in the tactics that I'm now trained in, that would have been my job, and I would have gone in there and I would have confronted that threat, and I would have been expected to do so. Not doing so stuck with me for quite a few sort of weeks, a few months, because it's one of those where, what if somebody had been injured in there and there's police outside and we're not doing anything? But unfortunately, the directive is you're unarmed, you're not going in there. You will wait for the appropriate resources to arrive and deal with it better. So Yeah, that like I said, that was a long time ago, but that was one incident that certainly stuck with me where I believed had I been suitably trained and suitably equipped, I could have dealt with that
Sure.
um, quite effectively, really. Which is one of the reasons why I ended up moving into the department that I now work in.
So walk us through how it works. I hope I'm not boring my audience. I find this fascinating, but I'm just curious about the differences in training. You touched on training a moment ago. So in the basic sort of police academy, whatever you would call it there, we call it a police academy. I assume you call it something similar. What if any firearms exposure do you have in the basic academy? Do they at least show you various kinds of guns, for example, to learn how to make them safe or anything like that? Or is there any exposure at all for the basic police academy to firearms, either shooting them or dealing with them?
So when I joined the police a few years ago now, there was basic exposure. So if I recall, um, we went into the armory and the range where I used to work, and we were there was a number of weapons on display, handguns, carbines, etc. Weapons that have been seized through criminality, and also a number of weapons that we as the police use. And there was I don't know, half a day, if I recall, of basic sort of show and tell around firearms. Um, I didn't get to fire any. I believe that maybe one or two officers did, just as a bit of an exposure. I think that still happens now. I'm not 100%
Mm-hmm.
certain. Training in the police in the UK has changed quite a bit since I joined. I can only hope that is still something that they do get. And I'm fairly certain it is, but it's probably dependent upon different forces. Some probably have a bigger exposure than others. But as far as handling them, it'll be minimal. It'll be really, really minimal. More officers are likely to get an exposure into firearms if they come on attachments or sort of what we call ride-alongs with us as armed officers if they're looking to join the department.
Interesting. Okay, so last question on this topic, and then I promise I'll move on to more interesting stuff for our audience.
No, it's fine.
So, if you're an average citizen, let's say in the UK, and you have an interest in firearms, how hard is it or easy is it for you to find a place to go shoot a shotgun? Let's say maybe you don't own it, maybe it's owned by a range. Is that a thing that happens? Is that popular, or is it just no one own guns or deal with them at all, sort of in the general public?
General public to get a firearms license. So we've got two different types. We have firearms licenses and then shotgun licenses. So they are classified separately in the UK. You can obtain licenses. You have to have certain reasons as to why you want them. So for sport shooting, that's a justification. If you're a farmer and you need them for work on your land, then that's a justification. They're quite difficult to get. There are issues around obtaining licenses if you've had sort of previous sort of criminal histories. Then almost certainly that would either prevent you or make it really, really difficult, even if it's minor. So they are difficult to obtain. As far as shooting, in the US, I know you could sort of go into a range and probably, I mean, I've not done it when I've been over there, but fill in a bits of paperwork, have some ID, and you could probably go on the range for a day. I remember you assuming it's that sort of process. Here in the UK, that won't happen. We don't have those facilities unless you are a licensed firearm or well, in those circumstances, it'd be a firearms license, and then there will be ranges that you could probably go into and utilize, but it would be under very stringent sort of conditions.
Interesting.
It's definitely a lot tighter here if you wanted to obtain them, definitely.
Well, if you ever make it over to this side of the pond, come to Arizona, and we will absolutely blow your mind with the array of of publicly available firearms that you can go shoot. I'd love to have you. So if you ever make it over here, look me up. So
absolutely,
let's discuss the incident that happened with you, that happened on duty for you. Just kind of walk us through what you were assigned to that day, what kind of patrol assignment you had, and what happened, and how you were alerted to the fact that there was something going on.
So this incident happened back in January 2019. It's towards the end of January 2019, where, like I said, I work on a firearms team. At this particular point, it was in a different force. And basically what happened was there was an individual who had been let out on license from prison. So he was a dangerous offender, and he was out on license. and it was believed that he had committed an armed robbery with a shotgun. Probably 3 or 4, maybe 5 days before this particular incident. We were tasked eventually with looking at arrest attempts for him. Again, in the UK, things like armed robberies, if they're committed, in general terms, they're either replica firearms or they're genuine firearms that are unloaded. It's very rare, as bizarre as it may sound, for offenders to go into premises with loaded firearms. It adds another element of where they are in their mind, really. And in the UK, although it does happen, and we do have our problem with gun crime, it's not generally the two go together. So this particular incident, this armed robbery that happened, the individual in question had ejected a shotgun cartridge at the scene from the armed robbery. So when the police attended, and we knew now that it was a viable firearm and he had ammunition. So again, this was immediately tasked to ourselves. We managed to sort of ascertain who we believed it was. And it was this, like I said, this individual in question. So we were tasked with trying to basically track him down. The night before this incident, we had gone to certain addresses to see if we can locate him, basically, and that was negative. But we knew that he was at large, and we knew that he had a genuine firearm and ammunition. When we came into work, so I was working a night shift, and my colleague that I was crewed with, we were sort of routine patrol, which is basically in an armed response vehicle. So we at the time were driving BMW. I think it was an X5 that we were in. And when we patrol in the UK as an armed police officer, we carry all of our kit in the back of the car, basically. So it's in a gun safe. We only carry a pistol, so a Glock pistol, which is what we routinely have on our hip. Mm-hmm. Everything else is stowed away in the back of the car until we are authorised. So until boss basically makes a decision that firearms need to be put on the streets, basically.
Let me stop you right there.
Sure.
So I have to ask this. I assume I know the answer to this question, but I shouldn't assume too much. So if you are driving down the street and all of a sudden you come under fire, let's say, you don't have to request permission to go to the back of your car and pull out your MP5 or whatever it is you have, whatever long gun you have, right? You would be able to deploy it on your own independently?
So we like I mentioned earlier, we have a criteria what we call a criteria for deployment. There are certain things that have to kick in before we can authorise firearms being sort of brought out of the car, as it were. However, there is a big caveat to that, and we call it self-deploying. So if we are confronted with a threat in front of us, we don't need to go through that protocol to sort of go up the line, if you like, to request permission to get guns out. We can get guns out and deal with that threat. So we do have that ability to confront a threat if it's faced us there and then. So we do have that ability, but generally within the framework of armed policing in the UK, we have to be authorised by what we have as an inspector. So we have an inspector that is in the control room, and they're the ones that make the decision whether or not guns can come out, in essence.
So an inspector, I think in the UK, is what we would call a detective here, sort of a supervisory, or is that considered a rank inspector?
The inspector is a rank. Okay. So you have a constable, which would be me, police constable. We then have a sergeant, a police sergeant, which would be my immediate sort of supervisor, right. And then an inspector is above. And within the UK, the inspector is what they call a TFC, so a tactical firearms commander. So they are accredited in the control room to make decisions and to authorise us to go and do whatever job it is that we need to go and do. So we have quite a strict sort of criteria and rank structure that we have to follow, unless we are faced with an imminent threat in front of us that we don't have the time to go and do that, and we just have to deal with whatever it is in front of us.
That makes sense. So that's not dissimilar to what we have here. Most departments have officers. They might have a corporal who's sort of a second in command of a squad, and then usually you have a sergeant who runs a given shift, and then for you, an inspector for us would be a lieutenant or a watch commander who would sort of oversee operations, and kind of have a finger in what's going on. So that makes sense. That's not dissimilar at all, actually. So you are in the process of looking for a person you are reasonably certain is not only armed but has working ammunition, that leads me to a question I had a moment ago. So when you go to charge someone in court for a firearms crime, is having an unloaded gun or a loaded gun the same crime, or is there an added charge or an added element of a crime for having an actual loaded gun with working ammunition?
It gets a little bit complicated in the UK with this, because there are separate offences and more severe offences, but they don't always have to be because there's ammunition.
Mm-hmm.
So logic would dictate that if you've got an unloaded firearm, that's a particular offence, and then if it's loaded, it's a more serious offence, and then if you use it, it's a more serious offence. That kind of is the structure we have, but it's all about intent, what you're doing with it. So you could have an unloaded, you could have an imitation firearm and shove it in somebody's face and demand something from them,
mm-hmm.
and it have no capability of being used because it's not real.
Sure.
And that offence can be a lot more serious than if you were in the public domain, say with a unloaded shotgun and you're walking down the street with it, or a loaded shotgun, but you're not doing anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
So there are sort of caveats to each one of those offences. So yeah, it does get a little bit more complicated with your intent as opposed to just what you've got. But certainly in the UK, if you don't have a license for a firearm or a shotgun and you have one in the public domain and it's loaded, that is a very serious offence. If you then start threatening somebody with it, even more serious. And then if you start discharging it at somebody, then obviously you're going down the sort of higher end of our system as far as your offending is going to go.
That makes perfect sense. So now you and your partner are on a night shift. You are looking for someone, as I said, that you have reason to believe is armed with a working firearm with working ammunition. So walk us through that evening and what happened.
So we're on, like I said earlier, just sort of routine armed patrol. We weren't particularly looking for him at this point. There was certain stuff that had gone on in the day that we were sort of aware of in relation to trying to locate this male. That hadn't been successful, so we were aware that he was still at large and sort of still a risk to the public. When I believe it was probably around about midnight. I get my times a little bit wrong because it was a while ago now, but it was around about midnight if I recall. And we in our car we have our radio channel set to whatever town that we're in. And then in our radios, we have a dedicated sort of ops channel. The car set basically picked up from the comms op that was running it, saying that there's a report coming in that there's a male in the high street of this town. It's a little market town in the middle of Somerset. This isn't a big city mm-hmm. where you're expecting potential sort of firearms offences to be going on throughout the night. This is sort of middle of nowhere really. But a call had come in to state that a male had discharged a firearm into the street, and then he had discharged it through a shop window. Myself and my sort of partner, if you like, we immediately knew who this was. The locality, the type of gun that had been described. We were thinking, well, this is our subject. Why he's doing this at this point, we've got no idea. The shop that he had sort of shot through was closed, so there was no need for him to be doing this. So we started making towards that location. It was probably a good 20 miles away, if I recall. So we were some distance off. So before it even got authorised, we were starting to make towards, because we believed that this was going to be our guy, mm-hmm. and that he clearly was posing a major threat to the public at this point. I remember calling back to our commander, our sort of TFC, and just sort of stating that we're heading towards this, and that they need to consider authorising. At this point, other calls started to come in, I believe. So it gave more credibility to what was happening. So firearms at that point were authorised. We pulled over and kitted up, so we got our sort of carbines out, and myself and my sort of colleague, we'd worked with each other for quite a while, and we're very good mates, and we've had numerous firearms jobs. And as you know, there's different levels of severity to firearms jobs. We'll go to stuff that is quite low level, and then more serious stuff. This was definitely coming in as a more serious incident, and the risk to us and the risk to the public was really, really high. He knew clearly, and at this point, in my opinion, he knew that the net was closing in on him, and we, like I said, we didn't know at this point why he was doing what he was doing, but it was definitely behaviour that was trying to provoke a response from what we believed was us. He wasn't particularly threatening anybody in particular at that point. So the assumption that we made was that he was trying to entice police to this location. So we had to be prepared for that this was potentially an ambush in essence. This is what our initial sort of thought process was. So we prepared for that.
So real quick, so you have quite a way to go to get to from where you were to this incident, and you said about 20 miles. So that's going to take some time, and you had to at one point pull over, kit up, get ready for any eventuality. So I assume you and your partner are actually discussing this. You're talking this through on your way over there.
Yeah, absolutely. So when this job first came in, and we sort of made that assumption that it was our guy, we were having those conversations around, right, well, this has got to be him. Then when other calls were coming in to say, yeah, there's firearms being discharged. Certainly the conversation that we had was this is an ambush. He's doing this to provoke a reaction from the police. What kind of reaction we didn't know at that point, but it definitely sort of put the sort of hairs on the back of your neck on end, because you know you're going into something now where you've got a credible firearm. He's got ammunition, and he's obviously intent on using it. The next thought process was, well, who's he looking to use it against? Is he having like a mental health breakdown and he's just firing it indiscriminately in the street? Is he looking to use it on the public, or is he looking to use it towards the police? And my thought process definitely was more aimed at the police at this point. So yeah, we pulled over, we kitted up, and I remember saying to Chris, to my colleague, I remember sort of saying to him, you know, are you ready for this? This is one of those jobs. And we kind of had that little conversation, that sort of 30-second sort of exchange of we know we're not walking into something that is a run-of-the-mill firearms job for us. So we sort of kitted up, and then we carried on. And it was during this sort of process that our commander had further information to say at this point that there was some suggestion that he had just tried to carjack somebody. So that obviously, you know, now we're sort of having the thought process, well, he's trying to provoke the police reaction, which is one thing. You know, we're trained and equipped to potentially deal with whatever threat he poses. But now we know that there's members of the public involved, and that he had now, at least from what information we were told, is either pointed a gun or potentially discharged a gun towards a member of the public. So now we're on sort of high alert, if you like, and there's only the two of us at this point that are closing in at the speed that we are. Other units were making towards, but they were a little bit further away, or so we believe they were further away. Mm-hmm. And we have in the UK, within our firearms world, we have something called an operational firearms commander. So you've got your AFO, so authorised firearms officers, so we call them AFOs here. So you've got AFOs at the time, which was myself and my colleague, and then an operational firearms commander who is the ground commander. So they will take control. So the tactical firearms commander makes the decisions on what we're going to do, and then it's down to the operational firearms commander to implement that on the ground. So he was on his way with other units. But myself and my colleague were going to be the ones that were landing first. The last sighting of this male was in a pub car park. So we sort of arrived in this very small sort of village community, if you like. And I remember that because it was sort of January, it was snowing. So we sort of arrived probably, I don't know, 12:30 or something like that. Mm-hmm. And we're the first to arrive. And we rock up, and it's just dead silent. There is no one in the street. It's snowing. It's really, really cold. We deploy on foot initially because we don't know where this male is. And the last place that you want to be, as I'm sure you're aware, is in the middle of inside a car.
Right.
Which is in essence, the way that I look at it. If somebody's there waiting to ambush you, you're in a coffin already.
Yep.
So we arrive and we deploy straight away and just sort of get out on foot, and we're armed at this point. And I just remember it being very, very eerie because it was snowing and it was so quiet, and we knew within a few minutes of us arriving, this person had been firing off a shotgun in the street. So the two scenes didn't match up with each other. Which put us on edge because we're thinking, well, where is he? Where's he hiding?
Sure.
And we're to get sort of jumped by him, basically. At that point, two other units arrived. One of them being our sergeant, who was the operational commander, and he sort of took control of it. He sort of disseminated what tactics that we have, and again, we have certain tactics that we work towards depending on the threat. And it was one of those jobs, I'll be honest with you, where it's not, up until that point, I hadn't been put in that position where we now need to go and search for this male. We do this every day in training. I've had various degrees of exposure to threats within firearms. Like I say, some less, some more. But this was definitely a job where I was on high alert. I was very, very aware that this could be it. I'm about to get a shotgun shoved. Someone's going to pie around the corner of a car or a building and put a shotgun and sort of basically kill me. That was kind of the thought process that we had, because everything was just so odd. He's been shooting a gun in the street and now he's not there, but we know he is somewhere.
Right.
So we were given the tactic, myself and my colleague, of basically searching this pub car park. So there was cars, there was buildings, and I remember we work in very particular ways when we do these searches, and to offer the maximum amount of safety to ourselves and to our colleagues and the public. But when my sergeant said, you need to go in, in essence, I'm sort of paraphrasing, but you need to go and search and go look for him. Mm-hmm. In the back of my mind, I was kind of like, well, you go do it. You go find him. You're kind of put in that situation where actually this is real now. And I sort of jest and I'm sort of joking, but it was that kind of, well, right, okay, we've got to switch on now then. This is it.
Yeah, I know the feeling. It's a very distinct sensation to be actively where anyone else would be running away from this person. You need to go find him and try really hard not to get killed in the process. And there's no other feeling like it, in my opinion.
No. And this was definitely one of those. But like I said, I've had similar, a couple of similar sort of, not incidents like this, but similar sort of jobs where you think, well, this is going that way, but it never has actually led to it, where this was definitely one of those. So we started searching, and it was that very eerie, every sort of wall that we looked behind, every car that we crouched under, you were literally waiting. And I remember it vividly now, waiting for, well, this is it. I've got to look around this corner. And as I look round, I'm expecting a shotgun barrel to be in my face. So we continued with this for probably 5-10 minutes, as myself, my colleague, and my other sort of colleagues that had arrived, and we sort of cleared this car park area. And it was one of those feelings where once you cleared it, you think, thanks, thankfully we've not come across him, but we need to come across him. That's what we're here for. Mm-hmm. And where is he now? What's he doing now? Who we were under like I said, we were told that he'd potentially tried to carjack somebody. That person wasn't in the street at this time, so we had concerns in the broader sort of picture of what we were doing as to where that person was. Where's our offender now? Who is he potentially, shoving this gun in the face of now? Mm-hmm. So we cleared this car park and we realised that he wasn't here, and we then decided, well, we need to basically clear the street. So we formulated a bit of a plan as to how we would do that. Excuse me. And in essence, the way that we decided to do it was we'd have firearms officers out on foot, and myself and my colleague would be in the one of the ARV, one of the cars, the armed response vehicles, and we would clear the road and try and clear the sort of hedgings and front gardens of addresses as we were walking and manoeuvring. And we kind of didn't really know where we were going in the, it's basically pick a direction, because at this point we've got nowhere to really know. And we had limited numbers. I believe at the time there were 6 of us. So that was it. It was 6 firearms officers. At that point, trying to locate a needle in a haystack, basically.
So I have several questions now. One, do you,
Sure.
in the U.S., most departments, most agencies would set up a perimeter. Was there a perimeter set? Is my first question. And then what sort of, are you carrying a long gun at this point? Are you armed with some sort of rifle? And if so, what kind?
So we're armed with a carbine. So our primary weapon is in the force that I was in, is a Heckler and Koch G36
Nice.
carbine. So those are our primary weapons. We then carry a Glock SLP, and then we also carry a baton launcher. I don't know if you call it the same thing in the US.
40 millimeter.
So it basically rubber bullets in essence.
Yeah, we have this as well. Yeah, usually they're like a single shot, or they have them with a sort of a big revolver sort of cylinder where you can cycle them through. But yeah, we have something very similar here. Plus, we have shotguns with what we call beanbag rounds, but that's not what we're talking about here.
No. So ours is so it's a baton launcher, one round basically. So that's what we carry is less lethal. Mm-hmm. So we carry a taser and a baton launcher as our less lethal options, and we don't deploy without those. In this circumstance, at this particular point, we're all carrying our carbines based on the threat. There isn't a perimeter set up at this point because we don't know where he's gone, and there's only the 6 of us. Our firearms teams, and then this is the issue really, I suppose, if you look at the bigger picture, just at this particular point of the job that we're dealing with, because there's only a limited number of firearms officers, we will not bring in unarmed officers to a firearms job in what we call the sort of inner workings of it. We will only use unarmed officers as outer containment. So if we contain a building or we contain a vehicle, armed officers will be the inner containment. We then have a bit of dead ground, and then we'll use unarmed officers to sort of keep the members of the public out. This is at sort of 12:30, 1 o'clock or something like that in the morning, in the middle of nowhere. So our other armed officers that are coming from probably 40, 50 miles away, I think maybe 40 miles, they're having to make ground some distance. And the unarmed officers, this is a very sleepy little town, sleepy little village. There probably would have been maybe a handful of officers within a 10, 15 mile radius. But we wouldn't bring those into this environment. But what we would do is, and what we did do is bring in the helicopter. So we have a force helicopter. And they were deployed, which will give us that extra bit of overview. So we're kind of using other resources as this is starting to progress, just to give us that little bit more of an oversight and a bit more additional protection. But the helicopter didn't arrive at this point, and they were requested that they've got to come from miles and miles away. So at this point in the operation, it's kind of just us. It's 6 officers, and we don't know really where he is. So we make this plan of, well, we'll just pick a route, and we started to sort of deploy down there. And again, it's one of those where I recall speaking to my colleague who I was with, and saying to him, I'm really not comfortable being in this car. Again, my view is if we get ambushed here, we're the targets. Our colleagues that are on foot, they're just as much of a target as we are, but they've got the ability to sort of bug out and take cover where we don't.
Sure.
We're in this vehicle moving very, very slowly and a very obvious target. So it's a very uncomfortable position to be in based on the threat that we're opposing. But that's what, we've got no choice at this point. This is what we've come up with. And this is the way that we're looking to sort of gain ground. As we move through the street, I then realized where we were. So the previous night that we were looking for this male, we had done a bit of a recce on an address that he was potentially linked to.
That's reconnaissance, folks, for those who don't know.
Sorry?
I assume you mean reconnaissance? We said a bit of a recce.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, that's okay. For my American viewers, will have no idea what that meant.
Yeah. So yeah, we had done this recce the night before for something that we were looking to do the following day. And I realised that this was this address. It was probably about 50 metres in front of me. And I know that this address is linked to this male. So I'm thinking, well, this is a good shout as to where he may be. So we're definitely heading in the right direction. Whether he had made it to that property, we don't know for certain. Whether he was still in the street, we don't know for certain. But this has given us a little bit more information now to think, well, we're on the right lines. So a decision is made. What we're going to do is look to contain loosely at this point this address, but still have your 360 awareness, because we don't know. We focus all our attention on this address, and he could be in a garden behind us, and,
right.
and then we're going to get attacked that way. So we were making the best decisions that we could with the limited resources that we had at this point. So myself and my colleagues sort of contained this address that was in pitch black. It was completely in darkness. There was nothing to suggest that there's any signs of life in this address. But again, if you're somebody that's just done this, and you now know that the police are there, you've got that tread of thought, well, they could be trying to hide from the police, but yet he's made deliberate attempts to try and attract the police. So we were very confused as to what his motives were, as to why he's done this and then disappeared. So we contained this property, and it's only a small 2-bedroom house, sort of end terrace property. So we contain it, and then we get the helicopter up, and then more resources start to arrive. So more firearms officers start to arrive. So we are at this point able to put a decent perimeter around this address. We've now sort of drawn in unarmed officers that have got a wider containment on. So we've got a bit more of a grip of it. And although we don't know he's definitely in the address, we're kind of focusing most of our attention to this property. The command decision is then made. So we go through certain tactics, and they're although they can be quite flexible, we have certain tactics when it comes to buildings within firearms. So we go from something called an armed inquiry, which is we don't know if a certain person is in an address. So it's to confirm on a gate of threat. So that's the sort of terminology we use for this particular tactic. We then move up to what we call a contain and call out of an address. So we believe that there potentially is a threat in that property. So we're not going to approach it. What we are going to do is contain it and try and negotiate them out. And then we move up to things like a deliberate search or an emergency search. So an emergency search in the UK terms is if shots were fired inside that address, for example, we would be going straight in. And it's generally victim-led, looking to try and remove victims from that situation, or confront the offender. So we have very strict tactics that we work towards. And once that tactic is given, everybody knows what their role is. They'll have defined roles. Unless there's a massively collapsing time frame, we have the ability to sort of come up with a bit of a structure and a bit of a plan. This particular instance, we had the ability to do that. So we managed to get the resources around this property to contain it and then come up with a plan of what we were going to do. What we ended up doing was a knock on the door. So we've contained it. We have containment positions on. So should there be a threat that's posed, we have armed officers that are sort of set back a little bit and will have the ability to deploy. Myself and my colleague were tasked with going to the front door and basically putting a knock in. So because we didn't know he was in there and there was no signs of life in there, we're kind of putting our eggs in one basket, but we're not firmed up that there's anyone in there, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So although we're on edge because of what's happened, we're not at this particular point at the heightened side of it where we're thinking, he's in there and he's a threat. So we have that sort of flexibility to basically go up to the address, put some knocks in, withdraw back, and see if we gain a reaction. We did that a couple of times, and there was nothing. There was nothing from this address whatsoever. We were doing all the intel to figure out who lived in there and everything that you can imagine would go on, and there was still no movement or anything from inside the address. Conversations were then being made with our command. and a decision has been made to basically breach the door. So we call it limited entry. So a limited entry in UK armed policing sort of world, we'd basically breach, say, this front door, which is what we were doing. We breach the front door, and then we try and aid or facilitate communication with somebody inside. So we won't enter. We're not going inside the property. It's just to try and facilitate some comms if there's somebody in there. A decision was made to do that, even though we weren't sort of 100% that he's in there. We are sort of more and more believing now the links to this address, he could be in there.
Right.
So that decision was made from our command, and myself and my colleague were tasked with 2 others to go and do that. So what that basically entails is 2 officers with method of entry kit to go in and basically break the door down in simple terms. We'll snap the lock off and force the door open. Myself and my colleague that I was crewed with, our task was to be their cover officers. So while they're doing their sort of wizardry on the door, they're focusing in on that task. So they don't have that peripheral awareness of any threat. So we have cover officers that will go with them, and we will take on that threat of the aspect that we're working on.
Yeah, we have that here. We just call it breacher and breacher cover. So yeah, lethal cover on who's ever doing the breaching of the door.
Yeah, exactly the same thing. So we were tasked with doing that. So we've moved forward at this point, and our 2 colleagues were doing what they were doing on the door. So I've got a carbine at this point, and I'm covering the front door. So one of the guys is basically snapper. What we use a snapper, which is a tool to basically break the door, break the lock off the door. So he's doing that, and my sole role, if you like, at this point is to protect him. His colleague is feeding him the equipment, and my colleague is protecting him. Now, because of the way that we operate, we have lethal and less lethal. I've got the carbine. My colleague has got the baton gun at this point, but he's got his SLP on him. At the point that the door starts to be breached, as it were, one of the guys that's feeding the tools to his colleague just sort of notices in the top bedroom window. So to try and put this into perspective, it's an end terrace, very small house, and you've got a front door, which I'm sort of looking at, a living room window to the left side of that front door, which my colleague is kind of covering, and then a bedroom window and another small bathroom or bedroom window. So it's basically four apertures, and that's it. This top left bedroom window has a very small window that opens at the top. So it's like a horizontal, very small window, probably 1/2 foot by 3 foot, that just opens ever so slightly. It goes across the top of the window. He just clocks some movement behind a curtain. It just flickers and it just grabs his attention. He then shouts, "There's movement in the window." At which point, myself and my colleagues, our attention is drawn to that window. We're now the covering officers. So our job is, whatever that is we now need to try and engage and communicate with whoever that is. This movement flitters and carries on for maybe a split second. This is all very, very quick that this happens. It sort of feels like it was moments, but it was sort of milliseconds, if not seconds. As this movement is going on, I start challenging that person, it's armed police, let me see your hands, words to that effect, which allows the 2 officers that were doing the door to bug out. They need to get to cover. So as they're basically moving their way around us and we're shouting and challenging this person, my colleague has transitioned to his handgun, because obviously a baton gun at this point is completely pointless. We start challenging, and then within this split second, this window that's open, the barrel of a shotgun comes out, and all I see, again, it's hard to explain because this happens so quickly.
Sure.
That this barrel just sort of protrudes down out of this window in a split second, as we're kind of in the throes of trying to put a challenge up to it, and then discharged twice down towards where we were. And I remember seeing the muzzle flash of this shotgun. And I remember thinking, well, that's it. I've been shot. There's no way. This is probably 2 meters, maybe 3 meters above our heads, down in our direction. And I've thought, well, that's it. We're done. We've been done here. He's ambushed us, and he's going to hit one of us. And I remember thinking, I've been shot, but the adrenaline is keeping you going. So my colleagues sort of jumped forward, in essence, to the building line to try and gain a little bit of protection. And as we're doing this, return fire. And again, this is all within a second or so. There's just exchange of gunfire where the shotgun blast, 2 shotgun blasts come down, and then we engage back with him and put rounds back into where the gun was. Mm-hmm. At this point, your brain's not really clicking into place to think what's actually gone on. Like I say, I think I've been shot, but I don't feel it. So I'm thinking, well, I must have been hit. There's no way I haven't been. My colleague, has he been hit? Who else has been hit? And then you sort of get your senses, and we know that we've returned fire. So instinctively, I know that I've done what my training is, and my training has kicked in, and that is, someone's trying to kill me, you're going to get it back, basically.
Right.
I've done that. My colleague's done that. We don't know what we've hit because of the acute angle that we're firing at.
Sure.
We're just shooting back into this aperture where this shotgun's come out from. As we get our senses, my colleague has sort of grabbed me by the back of my body armor and started to pull me back because the gunfire stopped. We've had 5 seconds or so, something like that, of nothing. So we thought, well, we're sitting ducks here. If we remain where we are, and he comes out the front door, which is semi-open because we kind of breached it, we're going to get a shotgun in the head. We're too close to it now. Right. So we need to get back to the cover of our car, which was just it's probably about 10 meters away. So he's driving me backwards, and I remember looking at these 4 windows, one that we've just shot into. And then I remember looking at the 3 windows in the front door, thinking as we're moving back and withdrawing back, I'm going to get shot again now. This is the moment that he then decides you're going to get some. And I remember having this thought process, and I didn't in the end. And I'll explain why it's the best decision that I've ever made not to do something. Mm-hmm. But I remember having the thought process of he's trying to kill us. I need to put containing fire through each one of these windows. I need to put a round through each one as I'm withdrawing, because if he's in one of these, and I was 100% convinced he was about to shoot at us again, sure. If I put a round down, if I hit him, so be it. But if I keep his head down because he's got rounds back at him, it gives, and then, I'm not going to die, basically. That was the thought process. And for some reason, I didn't do that. And I can't tell you why I didn't do it, because it was, I'm going to do this because this is going to save my life. Whether it was just the speed that my colleague managed to sort of pull us out of the situation, or there was just something there that made me not do it, but I decided not to do it.
Let me stop you right there. So would that, if you had laid down sort of cover fire, as you might call it, or shot through those windows to keep his head down, would that have been justified under your departmental policy? Because that's a question. Some places that wouldn't, if you don't have an active threat, aimed at you or shooting at you, that would be frowned upon. Would that have been justified in your opinion, or would they have frowned upon that?
I'm sure that it would have been frowned upon, but also justified. If it's a tricky one, because I've had this conversation with people, and it's been 50-50. The same kind of thought process, I'm sure that you will have, where if you've not seen a threat, how can you accurately pull the trigger at a threat? Because that's what you're trained to do. Is you don't pull the trigger unless you're going to hit something. Sure. But equally, I know there's a threat in one of those windows because he's just tried to in my opinion, in that situation, he's just tried to kill us. And I don't want to die, so I'm going to do what I can do to prevent myself, my colleagues who are, that are still around us, being shot. So my thought process is, the split second that I had that was, if I do this, I'm protecting myself, I'm protecting the public, and I'm protecting my colleagues. But you are right that had I done that, I would have had to have justified it, and I would have justified it all day long. Mm-hmm. But it could have been that would have been a heavily that would have been heavily criticised as to why you've done that because of that thought process. But I suppose this is what happens in those moments where you think like I said, my thought process was I've been shot. He's trying to kill us. I don't, people don't shoot at police. These people don't shoot at people generally, but you don't shoot at police with a shotgun through a window without the intent, in my opinion, of you wanted to kill them, or as a very minimum, you wanted to do them serious harm. But I don't believe he wanted to do a serious harm. I believe he ambushed us for one reason, and that was he wants to kill a couple of cops before he goes back to prison. And that was my thought process. So it's one of those, isn't it, where if I have to make those decisions by putting rounds through windows that I can't see a threat directly behind, but it saves my life, I would have stood by it. But yeah, it's one of those that we've debated since this job. You're probably right not to do it, and others have been no. If that was me, I'd have done it.
Right.
So it's very difficult.
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, obviously, as a veteran police officer, that your actions will be gone over with a fine tooth comb and put under a microscope, and however many other cliches I can think of to describe the scrutiny that you will be under after something like this. So, getting back to the story, you're now being sort of dragged back, for lack of a better term, by your partner to a position of cover. So, did you shoot through those windows, or did you opt not to?
No. So as we were withdrawing, I didn't shoot through them. And there'll be in a moment that there's a really good not a good reason why I didn't do it, because I didn't know it at the time, but in my brain and my thought process subsequently was the best decision that I've ever made. Bearing in mind the pressure that you're under in that environment. So as my colleague is withdrawing me, we make it back to cover of the car. And it's one of those where at this point it's quite chaotic, as in, my colleagues that are bugged out, they haven't really seen what's gone on. They've just sort of bugged out as gunfire's coming down. So they think, have I been hit? I think I've definitely been hit. My colleague that dragged me back, he thinks again he's been hit, and it's just the way your mind plays tricks with you, because we hadn't been hit. But I remember coming back, immediately putting cover back on the building behind the armed response vehicle. And I remember saying to my colleague, check my foot, check my foot. My foot felt hot, felt painful. And that was it. I was thinking, that's where it is. I've been shot in the foot. I don't know why I thought that, but my brain was like, that's it. You've been shot in the foot. So I remember my colleague checking my boot and checking my leg, and I hadn't been shot. And then he had the same. He was like, check me. So we had colleagues checking each other and checking us while we maintained cover on the address, thinking, what the hell has just gone on? Because, like I say, he's made no communication with us. He's not attempted to identify himself in that building. And we were there for, I would say, a good half an hour outside, very obvious, very visible, knocks in on the door. And then he slowly, quietly decided to open a very small window and then shove a shotgun out of it. So I'm under no illusion at this point that he's tried to ambush us and tried to kill us. So again, we're really heightened now. And I remember my sergeant so I'm an OFC now. I'm a firearms commander myself, and the biggest bit of learning that I've ever had from anybody in firearms was my sergeant at the time, because we're not flapping, we're professional, and we're on task, but we've just been shot at. We think we might have just been shot. We don't really know at this point. It's a bit of a chaotic sort of process with everything that's going on. And I remember him coming to us as we're sort of trying to sort of get our breathing back down, because again, this all happened very, very quickly. And he came to us behind the cover of the car, and we're just right. Just breathe, keep calm, get switched back on, and get back on task. And that sort of calming sort of hand on your shoulder, for want of a better word, of 5 seconds. All it was a 5 second, right, guys, just calm, breathe, and get back on it. Everybody then instantly switched back on. There was none of this kind of like, check me, I've been shot, check me. We've all sort of calmed, got back on task. and sort of switch back on to what we were doing. So like I said, that for me was one of the biggest things that I've learned as a commander is if you get into a flap. Now he was there as well. He's in the line of fire just like we have been. He must be under a bit of panic around, what's going on here. And my guy's okay. Who's been shot? Anybody being shot? But he stayed calm throughout. And because he was calm, we then instantly switched back on. Boom, we're all calm again. So it's a bit of a side note, but it was one of those things that I've learned from what I do now.
It's an important side note for sure. We like to say around ASP, we like to say that calm is a superpower. I grew up with a father who was a submarine skipper, a captain in the Navy, and he, this guy's playing tag with the Soviets under the Arctic Circle in the height of the Cold War, so he was pretty unflappable. So I definitely understand what you mean by that. You could our house could be on fire, and he would be very calm and orderly evacuating us from the house. Not that it didn't happen, I'm saying, but no matter what went on, it seemed like he never seemed to lose his cool. So that's actually a critical point. I'm glad you brought that up. That's super important.
Yeah, and it's like I say, it's taught me a lot in what I've gone on to do in my career. But him doing that at that particular point was really, really important. And one of the things that, again, on a kind of side note, but really, really important as far as getting yourself back in battery, which in our training, and again, I'm sure it's exactly the same. We qualify every 6 weeks within the firearms world in the UK. So we have to qualify, shoot, we go through tactics, et cetera, et cetera. And if you don't cut the mustard every 6 weeks, you lose your tickets. So we are trained to a high standard. And part of that is your admin, your personal admin, because if your admin falls out when you really need it, you're in trouble. So one thing that we are, it's ingrained in us is breach checking. So every time you discharge your weapon, you breach check to make sure that you're back in battery, and that if you need to take that next shot, you can. And for me, even though it's really, really important, throughout my firearms career, whenever I've been on the line doing quali shoots, if there's one thing that my admin has been quite poor at up until this, was breach checking. I'd always get an instructor kind of like on the shoulder, breach checks. When we came back to the vehicle, so I've discharged a number of rounds. When I've come back to the vehicle, put cover back on, the first thing that I've done instinctively is tilt the carbine and breach check it to make sure I don't have a jam round, that my gun is ready to go, because I've just been shot at. I'm probably going to get shot at again. That was what my thought process was. And I need to know that I've got the right to reply. So from a training perspective, that sort of tap on the shoulder whenever I've not done it, and the way that we're trained, to do your personal admin is so important, because had I not done that, and I would have needed to take another round, and my gun be not in a position to return fire, then I'm useless. I'm out the game. I'm putting myself at risk. I'm putting my colleagues at risk, and it's just one of those things that under all of that pressure that's going on, and your brain is whizzing 100 miles an hour because of what's gone on, it's the stuff that's ingrained in you to tilt your gun, breach check, right, I'm ready to go. So it was one of those things. Two things that immediately stuck out when we come back to the car for cover was calm, keep calm, get back on track with what you're doing, and on task, and also make sure that you've got the right to reply. So I don't know. Yeah, again, I mention it because it for some reason they're two things that really stuck out to me and probably really, really important. So yeah,
I love the terminology "right to reply." By the way, that's very clever. I'd never heard it referred to as that, but I like that a lot.
Yeah. It's the sort of, again, the sort of terminology we're sort of ingrained in, I suppose. But yeah, so we've in essence done that. We're back in the fight, as it were. And within a couple of minutes, I believe, our subject, calls 999. So he calls the police himself, and basically, and again, this is all on the internet. The footage of this job, some of the body cam footage is available for all of this, so you can sort of get a perspective of how quickly this all happened. But in essence, he's then called the police. and said, I've had a gunfight. You know, I'm sort of paraphrasing a little bit, but he said, I've had a gunfight with the police. You know, a shootout. I've now, and then this is the point that it gets really, really serious for us, is he turns around at this point and says, I've got 2 kids in the address and a woman. And this is relayed to us. And we've now got negotiators en route because of what's happening. And it was at this point when that information was passed that there's kids in the address. And I have to stress that throughout this half hour, 45-minute period at this point, from the moment that we turned up, there's been no movement, nothing. You've got even when the exchange of fire happened, it remained silent afterwards. There was no kids screaming. There was nothing. So when he said I've got kids in the address, it put a completely different dynamic onto what we were dealing with. Initially, like I said, we thought we were dealing with him in the address on his own. At the point that we realised he's in there, you know, we can deal with that. He's in there. He hasn't. He shot at us, but we're still alive. We haven't taken any casualties. Our tactic at this point will be to just negotiate him out. If he starts shooting at us, then we can deal with that. But you know, in the wider picture, we know where he is. He's contained. Once you put children and other people into it, depending on what his intentions are, causes a massive issue. So once this information started to come through, we started to call in other resources. So we have sort of dynamic intervention teams. That's what they sort of they used to be called that, but they're more sort of specialist firearms officers that can deal with like hostage situations in essence.
Yeah, we call that SWAT, special weapons and tactics. Yeah, something similar to that.
Yes, yeah, but basically. So we started putting the balloon up to sort of get these officers towards. And it was at that point that this was all within a few minutes. When that information come through, I've looked back up to the window that we've just shot through, and there's multiple rounds that have gone back at him. So there's two trails of thought. One is when he's made the phone call, how? Because he's had numerous rounds go back towards him, very, very quick succession. How has he not been shot? How is he still in the fight, as it were? And all I can put it down to is he's had some kind of Matrix kind of vibe going on in that address, and he's had rounds pinging at him, and he's kind of, avoiding them somehow. So we were quite surprised actually, because we were kind of expecting once the dust has settled and we were trying to sort of engage with, put more challenges back in, that we were expecting to go in and have to kind of retrieve him, so, first aid, do the sort of things that you'd be expected to do. So when he called the police, we were surprised that he hadn't been struck by one of our rounds. But then once that kind of, he may be shot, but he's still in the fight. But the point that he says that he's got children in the address, I've realised that the window that we've had this engagement through is a child's bedroom. And it was at that point that it's sort of acknowledged in my brain that there's like pink curtains and sort of children sort of stuff in the window. And that point, I remember sort of focusing through, keep them, because we're expecting to engage with us again at any point. But then I've realised, well, we've just had in an essence, a mini gunfight with this guy. And what if one of our rounds has hit a kid? We had no information to know there was children in there whatsoever. But what if one of our rounds has hit a child? And that, although you're trying to stay focused, tasked, and you've still got a job to do, your brain's still your brain. You are thinking about these things because you as the individual have shot through that window. You now know there's children in that house. And you don't know what state they're in. Have we shot a child? And he's not telling us because he's trying to, look after himself and cover himself. You don't know. So it put a completely different spin on it. As this negotiation carried on, he then went to the back of the property, and then he started firing a shotgun out the back of the window, at the back of the property. So we've got negotiators talking to him, and he's making all these threats. As you can imagine, somebody would be in that environment. And then rounds start going out the back. Now we've got colleagues at the back. They're my friends. We've been engaged, And at that point, you're only thinking about yourself in those very sort of collapsing sort of seconds as it's all going on. When and you kind of, I can only sort of explain it as in, you're quite happy that if he's shooting it, if you're the threat. So while we're at the front of this building after we've had this sort of gunfire, if he starts shooting towards us, well, I can deal with that potentially, but at least I know he's not shooting towards anyone else. When we realise he's now making shots out the back of the address, you don't know where if he's aiming it at people, is he just discharging it? And these are my friends, these are my colleagues that are out the back. So you then start thinking about them, and you can't do anything at this point because you've got a job to do here.
Yep.
And you're relying on their training at the back to manage that.
Yeah, and you're absolutely you can't go anywhere. You need to stay where you are because you have a job and a mission in the front of the house. But I can imagine it must have been a terrible feeling knowing that your friends and colleagues are being shot at in the back, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a horrible feeling. Everybody there that was on that job, firearms wise, I know, and they're my friends. And then you've got the wider police that I may not know because it's not my local area, but they're your colleagues, and they're the public. So yeah, it's one of those where you've just got to focus on the task in hand, and hope that we can resolve this now safely. And every effort at this point has been put in, and negotiators that were there were doing a great job trying to sort of communicate with him to sort of talk him down. And it was at this point, so again, where I've sort of jumped ahead a little bit, but where we were withdrawing and I was making the decision, do I or don't I put containing rounds down? It was at this point that I've realised that there was children in that address, that I thought to myself, crap, what if I'd have done that? What if I'd have put rounds down? Because I don't know what I'm aiming at. I am just putting them through a window to keep someone's head down. The likelihood, in my opinion, and the way that you kind of have to accept it, and I kind of do live with it and accept it, is that if I had made that decision, I could have easily, by mistake, put a round into a child because they're downstairs in the kitchen hiding, and I just put a round down. Round goes through the window, it ricochets off something and hits somebody. So that thought process, once we realised there was children in there, not only was it the thought process of have I done it when I put the rounds in, but then that thought process of what if I'd have done that?
Right.
If I'd have done that, we could be looking at all kinds of issues now. So when I said earlier on, it was the best decision that I made was to not do that. That definitely was, and it was just luck that I didn't make that decision. Take away the issues around, would you be criticised for it or not? You put in containing fire into a window to save your own ass, and then you inadvertently hit a child.
Yeah.
Even if it's justified, you're never going to live with that. I would struggle with that, and I struggle to some extent the fact that nearly happened. So let alone had it have happened. So he's sort of firing, back through this, and we've got negotiators onto him now. And then again, he basically makes a decision, or certainly suggests that he's going to come out the front of the property now with the children as, in essence, as a human shield. So he's saying, I'm gonna bring the kids out. I'm sure that he said I'm going to let them go, but I'm going to be behind them, and they're coming out, and I'm going to be controlling them. And based on everything that had been going on up until this point, my thought process was he's not letting them out. If he's going to let them out, he could have let them out before we even got there.
Right.
He could have let them out as we've turned up. He could have let them out as we've had this exchange of fire. My thought process was he's going to go out in a blaze of glory. That was what I genuinely believed. And I thought what he's going to do, he's going to come out and use them as a human shield and then shoot at us. And then we're going to have one of those decisions to make. And that thought process was really, really bad. Because I remember this was coming through in my ear on my airwaves, so my earpiece, that this was what he was going to do. And because of the sheer dread of that decision, of what he was going to do. I remember verbalizing it. I wasn't speaking to anybody, but I remember going, no, 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 just to myself, because
Yeah.
I was thinking, if he does that, we're, and again, until you're put in that position, and people will have their opinion on what they would do, and it's the what if, because my thought process is, he comes out, he levels a gun, I shoot him, I hit him, brilliant, resolve. He comes out, he levels a gun, I shoot at him, I miss him, and I hit one of the children. Or he comes out, I can't take a shot, he shoots me. Or he comes out, he takes a shot, I go to cover, I now don't know where he is, and he comes out, and then he's in control of the situation more. So these thought processes are going around in I'm sure everyone's head, but certainly in my head.
Let me cut in here for a second. I have a really important question, which is,
Sure.
in that moment, as you're envisioning these possible outcomes, if he comes out with kids or without, or what might happen, how confident are you in your marksmanship with the gun that's in your hand, that if you had to, you could have made that shot? Because that definitely is going to play into your decision as to whether or not you're going to pull the trigger. Is, am I confident enough with this gun at this distance to make a shot like that?
I would be confident. Um, it's one of those, isn't it, where we train and we train and we train. We certainly in the police in the UK don't in firearms don't have as much training as you guys do over there. We do it every 6 weeks, but it's only every 6 weeks. We train as much as we can do. We're picked and we're chosen because of our our ability to take on that training and to succeed. And our shooting that we do, our training with firearms and our qualification shoots and our developmental shooting is really, really good. So I wouldn't pull the trigger without having the confidence to hit what I'm aiming at. When I've shot through that window, I've shot at the threat. Be it it's a window, it's a really acute angle. I've not hit him. So we didn't hit him. However, like I say, he's had a matrix moment where guns are pinging around him and he's waving his arms and he's not been stopped. But I still, under that pressure and under those circumstances and the acute angles, I've still put rounds down to where the threat was, and my colleague has as well. He's put rounds exactly where he intended to put them, but we still not hit him. In those circumstances, I would be confident that at the distance we were at, which was probably only, I would say, 20 meters with the carbine, we're trained far in excess of that. So I'd be confident that if he was a threat, that I would hit what I was aiming at and stop that threat. But you're only human, and your brain, my thought process at the time was, what if I don't? It's that I'm confident in what I'm doing, but I have to consider, what if I don't?
Right.
What if I don't? What if I do this? What if I do that? And it's a really, really difficult position to be in, because I've had sort of friends and colleagues afterwards that have said, well, 100%, you just shoot him. If he comes out and he levels a gun at you, because that's what your training is, he levels a gun at you, you're gonna, try and negate that threat. You bring potential hostages or human shields into it, it adds a whole new layer onto it.
Yep.
So I would like, sitting here nearly 4 years later, I'd like to say, if he had done that, I would have reacted appropriately and hit my target. But I'd be lying if I said there wasn't a thing in the back of my mind saying, well, if he had done that, what if I hadn't have hit my target? What if, because of the distances and the way that the G36s that we carry are zeroed in at, what if I'm aiming at a particular point of impact and it goes off, what if during the melee that we've had, that my gun hasn't banged up against the wall of the building and it's knocked the sight slightly. So my EOTech sight, I'm aiming through that, but it's not off. These are all sort of more retrospective things, but these are the sort of things that at the time you're not really thinking of. You're just thinking of, if he comes out and he does this, what am I going to do?
Right.
So I'd like to think and I'm sitting here now saying, yeah, I'm sure I'd have done it. But my thought process at the time was, well, what if I don't? I'm gonna, if this is what I'm faced with, just like my colleague, I'm not the only one there with a gun. There are multiple armed officers there that I'm sure are all going through that same thought process. If he comes at me, or if he levels that gun and he comes out the front door in what we were kind of anticipating, what are we going to do? Are we going to, are we going to be all on the same hymn sheet here? So yeah, that was a bit of a challenging sort of thought process of, okay, this is what's happening. But because the negotiators were really, really good, they talked him out of that. Whether or not he ever intended on doing that, or he was just trying to test us, I don't know. But it's those decisions as an armed officer that you're going to be faced with. And in the space of, I'm going to say like 10 minutes or so, 10, 15 minutes of arriving at the door, and then this instance, we've already had a mini, I say a gunfight. We've had an exchange of fire. We found out that there's children in the address. I've put rounds into that address, so I'm thinking, well, if I hit them anyway. We're now being faced with, he's coming out with potential children, and we've got to deal with that. To now we're trying to negotiate him in a different way. So there's a lot going on. And there's a lot of work that's going on. It isn't just me that was there. There was other officers there that are all going through this. That, like I said, he's shooting up the back of the property, and they're dealing with that themselves. They've got kids, they've got families, and they're all thinking, well, is this the night that this is where it's all going to go wrong? So this story isn't just about me. My colleague that I was with, he was by my side throughout this entire incident, and we've gone through this together. But there's a wider team that have all had their own personal sort of experiences within this job, and had to make certain decisions and whatnot. So although this is my experience that I'm explaining, there are other people there that have gone through just as much, and other things. But as negotiators have sort of conducted, their negotiations with him, like I said, he shot up the back a couple of times, and then in essence, the line so he's on the phone. He's basically discharged the shotgun. It hasn't come out it's not out at anybody or out of the building. It's internally. So we then, in normal circumstances, if we think that he shot himself or shot, sorry, let me go back because I've jumped ahead slightly. I do apologise. So we've managed to negotiate the children and the female out of the address. After another half an hour or so, some time later, we've managed to negotiate the children out. They've been allowed to come out on their own securely at the black container, so the back of the property, and they've been whisked away. In relation to that, one of the things, and again, it's kind of like a side note, but one of the things that really sticks in my head, there's been all this going on in that address. Gunfire has gone in and out of that address. Screaming and shouting has gone in and out of that address. And at no point did we hear any of those children scream or the woman scream, the mum. So I can only assume that they were that petrified that they were scared stiff.
Right.
And that also is something that sits with me, that these young children, and they were very young children, had to go through that, and either they were forced to be quiet, which is another option. He could have been he could have been forced them to be quiet. But again, children's instincts are going to kick in. If you're scared, I can only assume that you're going to scream and shout because you're frightened. And if you're that frightened that you don't make a sound at all, that must be hell. So that was another bizarre thing that I've sort of kept from this incident. That at no point throughout that job did those kids make any noise whatsoever. So yeah, really, really odd. But they were negotiated eventually, and he's eventually allowed them to come out. So we are now containing him in this address, and this is where he then discharged the gun. So our sort of protocol generally would be, if we think he shot himself, we still have a duty of care for him. And our protocol normally would be what we would call an emergency search, because we've got to go in and save life. Because of everything that had gone on, we didn't believe that was the case at all. So he's discharged this gun. It's gone quiet in there. The line is still open on the phone. Negotiators are still trying to negotiate with him or communicate with him, sorry. And there's nothing. And there's nothing for probably 5 minutes, maybe longer. And then there was a discussion, as there would be, between the commanders around, well, we need to potentially go in and see whether we've got to try and save his life if that's what he has done. It may not have even been 5 minutes. It might have been a lot less than that, but it certainly appeared to be a long period of time. At which point it was like, we were like, no. Everything that's gone on, this guy hasn't just taken himself out. And we were convinced, absolutely convinced, that he was in there. He had feigned suicide. So the police are going to go in. Mm-hmm. And then as the police go in, he's going to go, well, I'm having you. And I remember being privy to these kind of sort of communications and conversations. And my colleagues that were on the sort of black containment, so what we call the black containment, the rear containment of the property, they would have been tasked to go in because that's where, the entry point at this point we've decided would be the safest way if we had to go in. And I remember thinking to myself, no, those are my friends, those are my friends. They can't go in there. It's just that instinct of protection for others that you have with your colleagues. Because I'm thinking, no, this isn't right. We can't be going in this address. And I remember speaking to them sort of after and how they thought about that was it wasn't good at all. And I'm thinking, no, this guy hasn't taken himself out. So a decision was made, thankfully, that we would continue to try and communicate with him that we were fairly happy at this point that he hadn't taken his life. There were certain signs around where this gunshot had come from. There was no blood. There was various things that we've gone, no, he hasn't done this. And eventually, after maybe another 5 minutes or so, and he's realised that he isn't going to get the reaction that he wanted, and I'm convinced 100% that that's what he was trying to do. He's then fired the gun back out the back window, sort of in the air, and then screamed almost like a frustration scream. And I'm adamant that the reason he's done that is he's realised that he's not getting the reaction he wants, which is to try and ambush us again. Got bored with it because he knows it's not going to work, and then just got annoyed with himself. So has fired another round off in frustration. When he's done that, that's obviously ratified all of our decision making, as in, well, this is exactly why we didn't go in there. Mm-hmm. The negotiators have then negotiated with him for another prolonged period of time, and eventually he's bizarrely, which I still to this day don't get my head around. He's just gone, yeah, okay. He basically said, I've run out of ammunition now. I want to hand myself in. And he basically did. He threw the ammo bag out the window, which he had the shotgun ammunition. He's then, I believe he's then thrown the shotgun out the window, broken. And then we've negotiated him out, and then he's come out and he's been detained and then arrested. And it went from this really high end, he's ambushed us, he's having gunfights with the police, he's got hostages in there, he's trying to feign suicide to invoke us to go in, to then, I've run out of ammo, I'm a bit stuffed, I've not achieved what I set out to achieve, so I'll just hand myself in. And it just ended so abruptly. I either thought that one of us was going to get shot, which is what his initial intention was. I then thought that maybe he's going to do something to one of the hostages, or it did go through my mind that he might look to try and top himself at some point. But to hand himself in like that, I'll be honest with you, it wasn't expected. I thought that it was only going to end with somebody getting seriously hurt.
That's the definition of anticlimactic, is all these potential outcomes that are going through your head, that you're running these scenarios. And he's like, you know what? I kind of like prison food. Let's do this. I'll turn myself in now. I'm out of ammo. That's very bizarre.
Yeah, it's totally. And like I said, it was just, I wasn't expecting it at all. I was G'd up for more of a prolonged job. And it to end with some form of serious injury or fatality one way or another. But I think in essence it was, I've run out of ammo now. I'm not achieving what I wanted to achieve. And this is my opinion, is that he knew the net was closing in on him. He knew we were after him. He knew we were going to arrest him. He knew he was going to go to prison for an awful long time. And he wanted to take out cops and go to prison with a bit of a badge of honor. I've killed a cop. That is my opinion. What his intention was as to why this entire incident that night started. And it didn't work out for him. Thankfully, it didn't work out for him. But he was arrested and charged with attempt murder. So he was charged with attempt murder on myself and my colleague, and then he was also charged with a number of other firearms offences. And then he ended up going to court about 7 months, 7, 8. It was November 2019. He went to court. So we had all of that period of time to sort of, there's a certain process, I'm sure there is in the States as well, that after that firearms job, immediately after, there's a certain process that's put into place that we sort of follow and go through, and you sort of have your welfare looked after, and then the investigation and whatnot. So we followed through all of that. We went through all of that, and then we went to court. And I was fully expecting to be convicted of attempt murder. He's pointed a shotgun at police officers. How he's missed us, I don't know. And then he's been on the phone to the police immediately after, saying he's had a shootout with police. And how do you want this to go down? However, the jury, jury's the jury. In the UK, with anything that's an attempt, it's really, really difficult to prove intent. And it was all about his intention. And what he basically stated was that he never intended to shoot at us. He was just shooting out the window.
You just happened to be at the door, shouting police at the time.
Yeah.
It's a coincidence. Crazy.
It is utter rubbish. In essence, so without sort of going into too much detail and boring people, but this particular individual isn't a big individual. He's quite a slight person. The shotgun that he had is an up and under double barrel shotgun. And what he had done is he had sawn off the stock of the shotgun. He's then hanging this shotgun out of the window, single-handed, in an elevated position above his head. So the barrel of the shotgun, which is a full barrel shot, a full length shotgun barrel, very, very heavy. I think he was aiming at us because he's had the time to do it discreetly. He was aiming at us and intended to shoot us, but because of the weight of the gun and the angle that he was shooting at and his poor sort of effort, if you like, he's pulled the trigger, and the recoil and the weight of it is just not hit. He's just not hit her, basically. So his first round, I think, just missed us by luck because he wasn't a good aim, and the weight of the weapon and the things I've just explained. And then the second round that went off almost straight away afterwards, I think it was just on the recoil that he's pulled the trigger, and he's not really had a decent aim at what he's aiming at, a decent view of what he's aiming at. However, trying to prove intent, and the courts and the way that the jury viewed it, they stated that they sided with his defence, as it were. I won't say they sided with him, but he basically stated, I didn't intend it. They're not shot. They haven't been shot. They're not dead. So how have I tried to kill them? And that was, in essence, his argument. And unfortunately for us, against everything that we believed that we had evidential, he was found not guilty unanimously of the attempt murder. He was found guilty of possession of a firearm with intent to endanger life and various other, like the armed robbery and various other offences. And that was quite tough at the time because, my view is we've done our job. We've gone there. We've protected the public. Myself, my colleagues that were there as armed officers have protected other police officers, and we protected ourselves. We put ourselves in the line of fire, and that was one job where we were in the line of fire. That's fine. That's what we sign up for. It's a voluntary role, armed police in the UK. We don't get paid any more for it. I get paid exactly the same as an unarmed police officer.
A couple things. We have a saying in American law enforcement: when people sign up at the motor vehicle department to get their driver's license. Usually it's called a motor voter law, I think, but that's usually when you register to vote as well, because you're about the same age as someone who's going to start voting is when you start driving a car. So we like to say, you never know what 12 licensed drivers are going to come up with after a trial. You just don't know. You never know when you go in front of a jury or rolling the dice. I have a friend who hopefully will be on this show soon. I'm not sure if yours or his episode will come out first, but a colleague of mine on a special response team, like a SWAT team, and they were going after the worst of the worst, a human trafficker who opened fire on him from basically two hoods, or bonnets, as you would say, distance away, as they were face to face in two cars right through the windshield with a very high caliber rifle. And he never was even charged with attempted murder. So,
Really?
it's not just you. So don't feel too bad.
Yeah.
Let's talk real quick about the process. This has gone really long, but I'm not mad because this is really good content. This is longer than the average show.
Right.
But no,
I can waffle, so I do apologize.
No, not at all. All good. So my question is about the process afterwards. I know here in the States, you have to make some sort of statement at some point to your superiors. Is it policy there that you have a certain time to cool off and think about what you're going to say? Do you have to give a statement right away? And did you feel like the process was adversarial, or did you kind of feel like, hey, this obviously was a justified shooting and didn't have to worry about it too much?
We go back, we put our pen to paper. We then consult with a solicitor, and then we go away, and then we come back a few days later, and then we do a full formal statement, and that is in consultation with a solicitor. So they will get to read through it, make sure that it reads as it should do, and then so we have professional standards, which it's an equivalent to like internal affairs. If that's terminology still, if I know it's called different things in America, isn't it? But that's the equivalent. Professional standards here is that they look at it to make sure. So this is all standard process. So they'll look at it to make sure that you've not breached anything policy wise or procedure wise, or if you have, then you'll know about it. And then it goes off to the what we call the IOPC. Which is the Independent Office of Police Complaints. So, or the IOPCC, Independent Office of Police Complaints Commission. They're the body in the UK that review anything that the police do. So if this incident goes off, they review it, and they can either go, no, this is absolutely fine. We've got no issues with anything the officers have done. Or they could go, hang on a minute, this doesn't look right. We're not happy. We want to open an investigation, and we want to see exactly what's happened and why that's happened. My incident that we're discussing, so we go through that process. It went off to the IOPCC, and then came back with, they were quite happy. Everything was justified. So the actual protocol around a police shooting in this incident was dealt with very, very quickly. Because it was, there's body cam footage for a start, which body cam in police firearms operations in the UK has only really been mandatory in the last few years, maybe 5 years. And even then, it's kind of like now it is like part of our policy is. So myself as a commander, it will be part of my briefing will be you will have your body cam on. It will be on. There's no if buts or maybes. Before it used to be a little bit kind of like, well, if you've got it, try and remember to put it on. But in the job, this particular job, it was a lifesaver because it demonstrated and clearly showed what we've done. There was no conjecture. We've to put the door in, and he's decided to pull the gun out and shoot at us. So, as far as an internal investigation around our actions, we were deemed to be completely justified in what we did. It was just a shame, really, that the jury in court didn't necessarily agree with what he was intending to do. Which, to this day, I'll say it until I die that was what his intention was. He wanted to kill a couple of cops before he went back to prison. So yeah, it didn't quite work out the way we wanted it to at court, but he still went to prison for 24. He got 24 years in custody with a 5-year extended license. So when he comes out of prison, he'll have to serve 5 years on license. Yeah. Is that long enough? The difference in the UK, the difference between if he got convicted of attempt murder, he would have been given it would have been, I believe, it would have been a mandatory life sentence with a minimum term of sort of 25 or 30 years. I think the barrister was telling us. So he would have still been given in and around the same kind of tariff, but he would have had to serve a minimum of those 25 or 30 years. The term that he's got now, I don't know when he'll be released. He could probably be released after 20 years, something like that. But he's been deemed to be, excuse me, because of his previous offending history as well. He's been deemed to be high risk, and he actually, even though it didn't go our way as a conviction, he's been given more in terms of prison sentence than other cases have for murder. So even though that seems odd, it just goes to show the risk that he poses to the public, that the judge who was sitting deemed him that much of a high risk that he imposed pretty much the maximum that he could do.
Yeah, and always we have this problem here as well. It depends on the jurisdiction you're in, what sort of sentence you might get handed in a similar situation. But my thinking has always been, look, judge or jury, if this guy was walking down your street towards your house, you would have wished you to put him away forever, for as long as possible. Look, he's proven himself to be a knucklehead. He's violent. He doesn't mind who he hurts. He's willing to shoot at police. We have him. He's in custody. Why would you ever let him out? Why would you ever let him out to potentially do the same thing? I'm all for second chances, but his second chance can be in prison, in my opinion, where he can find the Lord and do whatever else he wants to do, and that's great. But it's a real head scratcher. So this is, like I said before, this has gone long, but I'm happy it has, because this has been really enlightening. I'm sure a lot of our listeners will find the aspect of it being a UK shootout to be quite unique and interesting. With that said, let's talk, if you don't mind. I like to ask more about what happened after. So have you had any sort of PTS issues, any sort of reaction, hypervigilance, nightmares, anything like that occurred to you, if you don't mind discussing that?
Yeah, no. So it has had an impact. Excuse me, it has had an impact. So the force that I was working in when this happened, excuse me, the force that I was working in when this happened, myself and my wife, we had a newborn at the time. We were living kind of in the middle of nowhere in relation to our two sort of sets of families. We had moved for various reasons, we had moved to where we had moved, but it left us a little bit isolated from support networks. When this incident happened, me and my wife had a conversation, and she was kind of quite, and I can completely understand it, was, okay, you want to do this job. If you want to continue doing this job, that's absolutely fine, and I'll support you with it. But we need to meet closer to family, because if I had not come home that night, she's living a good hour, probably hour and a half or something away from our closest sort of family, which in real terms isn't huge. But if you, I suppose if you've gone through that and your husband's been killed or whatever, that's a big impact. That makes things, that hour and a half of being close to anybody has a more impact, I suppose. Certainly. So we made the decision to move. So I'm in a different force now, just because we're close to family. So I mean, we would have moved eventually anyway, but this incident certainly accelerated that process. So it has had an impact. As far as sort of psychological, yes, I've parked it. I'm like I say, I'm doing this because I'm quite open to talk about it. This, instances that happen to police officers. This is just one of those jobs that has happened, and it's one of those jobs of many where certainly in the United States, where this sort of stuff happens more and more frequently in the US. this is quite unique to us in the UK. You know, police involved shooters are quite rare. I've got friends and colleagues that have been involved in others where there have been fatalities. So although it's rare, it does happen.
Mm-hmm.
But here, because it's so rare, it probably has more of an impact. But for me, like I say, the issue that I've sort of come away with is more around the things that I've raised in the conversation around the children in the address. Yes, okay. When the dust has settled, you think, Jesus, I could have been killed tonight, or last week I could have been killed, and then last month, I could have been killed. But that's part and parcel of the job, and that's made me more of a rounded firearms officer, I suppose. And it's an experience that I draw on, and in the role that I do now, where I'm a commander. That certainly has had an impact in getting me to that position, if you like, because I've been through something which is a little bit unique, and like I say, the thing that my OFC on that particular job did, the lesson that I learned around being calm. As a person, I'm quite an animated, quite opinionated person. When it comes to firearms work, I switch on and I'm calm. I know what I'm doing, and I know how to do it, and I know how I want it. So I've learned a lot in relation to that job of how to, from that job, in how it sort of it affects the people that I'm commanding and the guys and girls that are under my command at a firearms job, because ultimately you're responsible as the firearms commander. If anything goes wrong on the ground, it's on me, and that is my personal responsibility. So it's affected me positively from that perspective. I'd be lying if I said there hasn't been times over the last 4 years where you think where you for some reason it just comes into your head and you'll be sat there. And my colleague that I was with, who went through, like I say, there were other people there. It isn't just about me, but myself and my colleague that were directly sort of involved in this. He's had an effect. This has had an effect on him. He's got through it, but there are still times where we talk, we meet up, and this incident comes up into the conversation. Mm-hmm. So I suppose there's always going to be something where in the back of your head, it's always there. There's something that has affected you permanently. Whether or not there's a longer term impact there or not, I don't know. I don't think so. They're very good at sort of dealing with stuff and parking it, and then it probably becomes an issue later on in life where you have an accumulation of these jobs and these instances and the things that you deal with as a police officer.
Absolutely.
And then unfortunately, I've got friends who have gone full circle with that and have had massive issues, and they've either left the police or they've had to be medically retired. So I hope that doesn't happen. I've got a decent support network around me, my family, my colleagues, my friends, but there has been times where certainly in the last 4 years where stuff has come into your head and you do start thinking, well, what if I'd not come home that night, or what if I had have shot a child? That's probably, for me, that's probably the bigger impact about that job is not so much me getting shot, because I come to, if something's happened to me, the issue is with my family that they're dealing without me. So I've had to consider that, and that's a horrible thing that you sort of go through that process of thinking, well, they're without their father, they're without their husband,
sure,
which isn't good. But we as a family, that's the job that I've done. The bigger issue that I sort of live with, I suppose, is around the children at that address, thinking, what if my rounds went into that window? The rounds that I actually shot at, that I shot through the window, what if they hit a child inadvertently that we had no idea was there? Then what if I'd have put a containing fire in, and that would have hit a child? Or they come to the door, like I've explained, they've come to the door, and then I've missed, and then I've hit a child. My sort of issues more are around the what ifs as opposed to the stuff
that actually happened.
Which is bizarre, really, because I've been shot at. I could have been killed. My colleague could have been shot and killed. And for a lot of people, that's probably the thing that will mess them up a little bit. The fact that they've been confronted with that. Where for me, it's more around the what ifs, which is probably a bit bizarre, but I'm sure if other people have been in those situations, they could probably acknowledge some similarities to that. Maybe not, I don't know, but that's certainly the issues that I've had since that job.
No,
is more than that.
Yeah, for sure. There's what ifs that still bother me as well, from my career. That's not. I don't think that's uncommon at all. And of course, we'll have people listen to this who have been in something similar, a situation similar to yours. It will probably identify with what you're saying. It's happened several times that I've had people reach out to me and say, "Hey, I really appreciate you talking to, in this case, to you, to Dave, because that happened to me as well." I've had numerous American law enforcement officers on the show that have been in shootouts, and it's funny. There is no right way to, or right or wrong way to experience it after the fact. It's your experience is your experience, so you can't compare it to really compare it to anybody else. Dave, that is our time. This has been an absolute pleasure. I appreciate you reaching out to us and coming on the show, and I know that our American listeners and listeners all over the world will find this story absolutely fascinating. Last time I checked, UK was number 3 in listenership, so you got to tell your friends about the podcast over there. Dave, help me out, because
I will do.
Canada's beating you, and we can't have that. We can't have Canada, ahead of the UK. It's not right.
No. Well, we've got on a slightly side note, but referencing that, we've got myself and 2 colleagues. We have an Instagram account called Op Crayon, where we've basically we've raised money and we've gone out to Ukraine and delivered initially it was aid to children refugees coming across the border. And then more recently, we've gone out and we've gone into Ukraine and delivered medical supplies directly to the Ukraine military. And because I knew we were doing this, and I was coming on here tonight, we put a link up to the podcast. So hopefully, we don't have a huge following. We have about 750 people, which for what we're doing is huge for us.
Sure.
It's not a bigger picture. But we put a link out to the Active Self-Protection website and the podcast. So certainly people that follow us will be shown the link, and will hopefully now start following if they weren't already. And a lot of our community that do sort of follow us, it's all emergency services and military. So hopefully, just off the back of our podcast, we can help support, just even if it's by a few more. But absolutely, I'm a big fan, and I've been sort of watching Active Self-Protection for some years now, so I'm a big fan and can't sort of talk enough about it, really. So you've definitely got support from our end.
Outstanding. So give that Instagram page another plug real quick. Tell the folks where they can find it.
So it's Op Crayon, so OPCRAYON, Op Crayon on Instagram. And it's myself and 2 other armed police officers. We just we're looking to raise money and do what we can to help the military in Ukraine and the refugees. So any support we can gain from anybody that's listening to this, even if it's just followers, just to sort of keep up to date on what we're doing, then that would be amazing.
Op Crayon on Instagram, folks. You heard it here first. Check it out. Dave, again, thank you so much. I appreciate your time, and keep in touch. Yeah. If you make it over this side of the pond, hit me up. We'll go shoot guns, and we'll kill some paper terrorists.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Yeah.
All right, man. Thanks again, Dave.
No worries.
Alrighty, gang. Our main interview is over, and it was a humdinger. You don't always hear about police shootings in the United Kingdom. It's rather unique, rather rare. Before I get started with our friend Mr. Gutowski, I just want to shout out real quick to the Tactical Tangents podcast. It was Mike from Tactical Tangents that helped me get my start as far as all the equipment I needed to do this podcast and all the knowledge base. And those guys are just killing it over there. So if you are in security, law enforcement, military, special forces, these 2 guys are in the 1% of their respective fields. Mike is in law enforcement. Jim is in the military. I'll just leave it at that. And they put on a great show. They talk about everything, all things tactical, all things training and prep. So give them a look. Stephen, it is nice to see you, sir. Your Eagles are standing at, 10 or 11-1 now?
It's 11-1.
Yeah, that one, sure, it's got to bother you, though, right? Those pesky Commanders on Monday Night Football. What are you going to do?
I already forgot about that one. I mean,
not a chance.
I watched that. I was at Buffalo Wild Wings, right? The classiest place to watch
Oh,
Sunday football, of
100%.
course. Uh,
They just got
but
a, I think they got a Michelin star for their honey wild buffalo wings, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, I actually prefer Glory Days, which you probably know of because
Yes.
you used to live in the area, in the DC area.
Yep.
But it was at Buffalo Wild Wings this time. Good crowd, to be fair. Very limited menu. It's really is the name is everything.
Kind of says it all.
But who doesn't love wings? Anyway,
Mm-hmm.
watch the Eagles blow out the Titans, which was incredibly impressive. They're actually so good that it makes me worry a little bit as an Eagles fan, just because like it's not how things usually go in Philly. Right. And you're used to like if they're going to win something, it's an underdog thing. I mean, you saw that when they won the Super Bowl, it was a total underdog, crazy story. And then this year's World Series run was, an underdog thing. Nobody expected them to even make the playoffs really, and then they went all the way to the big show. But with the Eagles being the dominating team in the NFL, it just feels like wrong and like something bad's going to happen. Right. But I try to put it out of my mind
as a Commanders Redskins football team fan. I can relate completely. And you guys are the overdogs, or such as it is. So sorry, that's just how it is.
And I wish you guys could come up with something other than a tie. That was the other thing I was disappointed at. B-Dubs. I didn't want to see a tie in that game.
Yeah, neither did we.
I actually wanted to see you guys win. It would have been better for us, but yeah.
Like you didn't need help. Anywho, so this week we are talking about an article over at thereload.com, by our stalwart reporter over there, Jake Fogelman. This came out on December 6th. And the title of the article is Federal Judge Delays Oregon's New Permit to Purchase Gun Requirement. So the idea being they had a ballot initiative and a little over 50% of the people that voted said that we should require you to have a permit to purchase a firearm. This rubs me in all the wrongest possible ways that it is possible to rub me. I don't like the idea of asking the government's permission just to buy a gun, never mind carry one. It's preposterous and it's unconstitutional on its face, which is kind of what we're talking about here. A U.S. district judge, and I think, Stephen, you said a state judge as well, have both come in and ruled, at least temporarily, that this is unconstitutional and put a stay on it. Or talk to us about what happened over there in Oregon.
Well, yeah, so there have now been two rulings where I'm actually working on a piece finishing a piece once we're done with the segment today on the state judge's ruling, which is actually more expansive. But the federal judge came in and ruled that she didn't rule anything unconstitutional. She ruled that the implementation of the permit to purchase requirement that was from the ballot initiative would be delayed by 30 more days. So when they wrote this ballot initiative, I guess they didn't really think through very hard on what would happen if it actually won, even though, there's a gun control initiative in Oregon, which is a pretty deep blue state at this point. And although, as you mentioned, it struggled to actually get across the line, only won with 50.7% of the vote. But for some reason, the way they wrote this was that it would go into effect, that basically it makes it illegal to buy guns without a special permit from the state. It's not unique in that sense. There are other states that have permit to purchase laws, usually very deep blue states, although North Carolina has one for handguns in particular, which I believe is a holdover from the Jim Crow era, but it's a policy that's out there. But this one would have made it illegal to buy guns really in any way, because Oregon also has universal background checks. So actually even to transfer firearms, with some exceptions for hunting and target shooting. And if you're, right there with the person, you can transfer them guns. But for instance, if somebody wanted to borrow your gun, actually I had this happen during the riots, right? A friend of mine wanted to borrow a gun to keep at home while all of that was happening, because they were worried about, someone breaking in. But in Oregon, you wouldn't be able to do that without first going to a gun dealer and transferring it through them, which of course this was 2020 when the gun stores were closed,
right?
For that period of time. So, you can see there's some problem. This doesn't just apply to sales, is my point here. It also applies to a lot of transfers, and you wouldn't be able to legally transfer a gun or sell a gun without having a permit from the state to do that. And the permit has a number of requirements. They're supposed to set up a specialized state background check in addition to the federal background check. There's fingerprinting, there's a picture requirement, there's a $65 fee that you have to pay, and there's a special, they have to set up a state-approved firearms safety course that you'd have to take in order to get this permit.
Okay.
And so none of those things are in place. And the problem is that the initiative set the deadline to have this permit in order to buy guns for 30 days after the effective date of the ballot initiative. And the effective date, basically that would be Thursday of this week. So right. December 8th, which is a couple days from when we're recording here. But they essentially, because these systems don't exist, and state officials said there was no way that they could actually get them up and running in 30 days because the other problem is that it wasn't 30 days from when it was certified, as some of the organizers of this initiative thought. It's actually 30 days from when the vote happens. And they didn't even know that this initiative had won for several days after the vote happened, because it was a very close race. And,
right.
And Oregon, like you in Arizona there and some of the other states, took quite a while to finalize all the votes. So that clock actually started from when the vote, from election day. So effectively what happened is the state, which is tasked with defending these laws and which says that they're still constitutional. This is, by the way, they also enacted a magazine ban. So you cannot, once, for some reason, this is another sort of oddity about this ballot initiative.
Right.
For some reason, they made the permit to purchase law effective 30 days after the vote, whereas they made the magazine ban, which bans manufacture and sale of magazines, and also the use of magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. But they have exceptions for, like, it's not a total ban on possession, because you can keep them on your private property or use them at shooting ranges. There are a couple exceptions for that, but you won't be able to, at the very least, buy or sell them anymore in Oregon. And so that doesn't go into effect until 180 days after the effective date of the ballot. I don't know why they did it this way. It's really not clear. It seems like the organizers didn't, from all the reporting I've seen from outlets like the Oregonian.
Yep. Oregonian.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds right. That, they sort of didn't think that part of this through and expected in fact, they were advocating for the governor to just push back the effective date of this law, but she doesn't have the power to do that. And so essentially what happened is the state now, which is defending the underlying laws, like they're saying these provisions are constitutional, which is, of course, going to be extremely controversial argument in court. Just the underlying provisions themselves are being challenged by every major gun rights group, actually. The NRA, Firearms Policy Coalition, the Second Amendment Foundation, Gun Owners of America, they've all got suits. There's 4 different suits against this law already. It hasn't technically gone into effect yet. But the states defending these laws, and even they had to send a letter to the federal judge in one of the cases asking her to delay the implementation. So they said, we're going to defend these laws, but nobody, there's no chance that we're going to be able to actually comply with the permitting requirement by December 8th. And so that's essentially what the judge decided today is, all right, you can have 30 days to try and come up with a permitting system, although I still don't see any way that they're going to be able to actually do that in 30 days. But at the same time, she did deny a temporary restraining order request from the plaintiffs, the people who are the gun rights advocates who are suing over this law. So
the Oregon Firearms Federation, I believe, is that right?
That's I believe the specific group in the case that she ruled on.
But she didn't grant
like
the TRO,
there's
though.
4 different suits.
She did not grant the TRO.
Exactly. Yeah, she didn't. So what the gun rights advocates, what the state wanted was just to delay the implementation of this law so that they can get together and try to come up with a permitting system. They didn't really have a timeline for how long it would take. In their letter, which we reported on as well yesterday, they just wrote that it would take at least a month. It seems extremely likely that it'll take far longer than just a month, but the judge granted 30 days. That's what they were asking for, is just a delay, not to block the entire law. Of course, the rest of the law doesn't go into effect anyway for another 150 days after December 8th. So there's sort of still time that they could presumably move forward on the case. But what the gun rights advocates wanted in this case was to block the entire law for an indefinite period until the question of whether it's constitutional could be decided.
Interesting. And I'm reading further on in the article by Jake Fogelman, and it says that the move delays a potential shutdown of all gun sales in the state. That seems that should get your attention, I think, no matter where you are, whether you're in Oregon or not, that a ballot measure passed by a little over 50% of the people who happen to be voting could have potentially shut down all gun sales in the state. I don't know. And again, with the timing of it and not thinking it through, it just shocks me that anti-gun people don't think things through to their logical conclusion. Like, it's kind of like the microstamping. If you're going to pass a law, the technology needs to be in place before you could pass a law requiring whether it's microstamping or this new database or these new permits or whatever.
Yeah. Well, so the good news for gun rights advocates is, that federal ruling is kind of a mixed bag, because it's basically what the state had asked for, which is, they were realistic and knew they were never going to be able to implement the permit system. And I'm sure that they understood if it suddenly became illegal to sell any guns in Oregon, that wasn't going to be a workable situation for them with the federal courts. But so they're trying to ask for this sort of middle ground where they get time to delay to put the rules in effect. But in the state case, the gun rights advocates got what they wanted, which is a TRO, a temporary restraining order, blocking the entire law, and without a stay, meaning that it'll continue to be blocked until an appeal is accepted, if one is accepted by the Oregon State Supreme Court. And that case is actually predicated on the Oregon Constitution. So the Oregon State has its own constitution, of course, like every other state. And like the vast majority of them, it has a Second Amendment analog. It has a right to keep and bear arms enshrined in the state constitution. And it seems, this is what I'm writing about right now. The piece should go live shortly at the Reload. Of course, it'll be up by the time this podcast is released. He's essentially taking the same reasoning from Bruin and applying it to Oregon State Constitution, because it's effectively, a lot of these state constitutions, we talked about the new gun rights provision that was added in Iowa, right? And they're basically identical in wording to the Second Amendment. So it would follow that they would be interpreted in a similar way. That's not always the case. A lot of states have, through case law, really degraded the protections of their gun rights provisions, their Second Amendment analogs. So, but it looks like the state judge in this case is not doing that. So, it'll be interesting to see how both of these play out simultaneously.
Absolutely. Stephen, I want to thank you for coming on. Folks, if you are lamenting the lack, and decidedly there is a lack, of down-the-middle, sane, sober reporting on all things Second Amendment and firearms related, please go over to thereload.com. That's thereload.com. And check out the articles, check out the podcast, check out all of the great stuff they have over there. And just remember that they rely on their members' dollars to fund their important work. They don't advertise with anyone. They don't have any other source of income. So carefully consider giving them a couple of bucks and getting a membership over there so you can get all this stuff and get it a lot sooner than you would listening to this podcast. Stephen, thanks so much for being here. I'll see you next week.
Absolutely.